As Andrew says, we've been practicing robo-advice for 3 years, and we've learnt a lot along the way. I was asked to talk a little bit about our innovation journey, and I'm very happy to share that with you, and also why we think it's so important from our bit of the industry. And it was kind of interesting that Daniel didn't mention financial advice, and I think probably within this room we would recognise a lot of the parallels between some of the things that Daniel was describing and some of the things that we recognise within our industry. So if I borrow from some of those things, I make no apologies whatsoever, and there will be no royalties exchanged as a result of that. Before I started, I also thought that it would be thank you. It would be useful to just give you a little bit of context around LV as an advice business, so that you know where I'm coming from when I make what might appear to be some fairly bold and possibly at certain points fairly pure points about why I think the financial services world has to change. I guess the first thing is just to talk a little bit about the team that we've got. LV is probably more famous, isn't it, as a product provider. Most people know the Dum Diddy Dum and the brand from car and motor insurance. We're also reasonably famous, I think, as a life and retirement product manufacturer, probably less known as being an advice provider in the UK market. We've actually owned an advice business for over 20 years. It's gone through a number of iterations. Its current form started to mature about 6-7 years ago when we started to create a digital to telephone advice omni-channel based in Bournemouth. We've got about, the team is about 75 people in the team. We're growing quite rapidly. We've got about 25 regulated advisors within that team. The maths on this are a little bit flaky because data sources are difficult to find on this, but that probably places us something like 75th, somewhere around that, biggest IFA in the UK. So we have some reasonable scale and some reasonable experience in practicing advice. And we're growing quite fast, and we describe internally our vision is to be the champions of modern advice, and you'll probably recognise some words that are quite similar to what Andrew said at the outset. But what I want the team to be is to have a mindset where we're trying to help customers, we're trying to help more customers feel better off through advice services. So we talk about rewarding advice services for the many. And that's the kind of the challenge that we set ourselves every day is how can we leverage efficiency, user experience, customer reach, relationships, so that we can serve people with the benefits of advice that perhaps historically have never thought that it would be for them. Now, our proposition focuses mainly on people aged 45 plus, so it's probably not some of the digital millennials that we typically talk about, but as we all know, they're incredibly savvy and incredibly expert on how to access modern and useful services. We focus around customers whose goal is to start to get confidence that they can retire comfortably and securely, and our emphasis is broadly on people that are looking to access and seek a retirement income, and that can be anything from advice on their DB scheme to defined contribution schemes, or bringing all of their savings together into a sensible retirement plan. And importantly for LV, we advise across a range of products, providers and investment funds, and we believe that to demonstrate objective advice and choice for our customers, we have to look at them and their needs and their preferences and recommend products that are available from across the market. I was talking earlier, that's a real plus point when customers understand that from us, and because of our strong trusted brand status. It's really interesting that it's also something that customers don't associate with financial services brands, that you would actually go out and potentially recommend another provider's products. They really like it, but actually getting that message through is quite difficult. So I think we operate at the more complex end of the advice market. Our solutions are focused, but our challenge is around helping customers are making pretty daunting decisions and generally pretty irreversible decisions, and trying to help them get it right. And as Andrew says, we kicked off an investment in robo-advice in 2014 and launched that in 2015. And I guess over the last 3 years, we've gained a lot of experience around how you develop and evolve that proposition in the marketplace, which I'll share with you in a second. I would also add that I don't come at this from the answer as advice, now what is the question? I'm conscious that sometimes I do sound like that, but actually we offer non-advised solutions for our customers as well, and we do think there is a place for customers that can make well-informed and sensible decisions. We only offer non-advised around annuities, and actually we challenge our customers very robustly around whether that's really the right thing for them to do, and we actually are increasingly seeing that customers will switch into advice solutions as a result of that questioning. But I kind of just want to recognise that as I talk about some of these things, we don't think that advice is the only answer. So the first thing I wanted to share, and actually doing this was, preparing for this was kind of interesting, because I went back to some of the fundamentals that we talked about 3 years ago, and you know what, they've not really changed, and most of these I think are pretty logical points. But I do think they make an incredibly potent strategic rationale as to why, as an industry and players with the industry, should be thinking much more about investment into expansion of advice-based enterprises. And actually, I actually think that the momentum behind this is building up over the last 3 years. So Andrew's touched on the demographics. The advice market as it exists today is a pretty big market, whether that's debt, protection, mortgages, retirement, investment. Circa 4 million customers per annum are benefiting from an advice transaction. And the policy environment is placing more customers into investment-based products. So the natural consequence of a demographic where customers are going to have to face more difficult decisions around saving for the long term and better self-provision means that through things like auto-enrollment, customers are going to have to take harder decisions around the right products and the right solutions for them. So, you know, industry predictions for what they're worth kind of indicate that the advice market should probably grow by about 50% plus in the next 10 years. But actually, I kind of go first and foremost to the better customer outcomes and increased confidence that advice delivers. And I think there is just an increasing bed of empirical data that demonstrates that overall, not every individual, but overall, consumers, customers are better off if they take up advice. And I've just pulled up 3 reports that have come out in the last 12, 18 months that highlight that. So Unbiased on the right, and the Royal London and International Longevity Centre report, which I think was a really, really good scientific report on quantifying the benefits of advice on the left. And I think this rational analysis kind of tells us that actually, you know, as an industry, this is one of the reasons why we need to do our bit to help customers access advice more affordably and more easily, so that they can get the benefits of advice. And you would think, wouldn't you, that in a market when there are only about 24,000 advisors and an opportunity to advise 4 to 8 to 10 million customers in the UK, that there would be a natural explosion of advisors in the UK, and yet, you know, we've all heard and discussed the advice gap. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. I think one of the things is when I mentioned that, you know, we're probably something like the 75th biggest IFA in the UK. Of those 24,000, there's a huge number that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 person enterprises, and they're quite comfortable. They're not turning up in the morning and seeing that they've got a shortage of customers looking to obtain the benefit of their services. They tend to be towards the mass affluent, high net worth, and they probably don't have the investment reach to spend in remodeling their business, nor, frankly, the motivational desire. And the system is not prime pumped with customers who think that advice is for them. So they're not running around saying, nobody can serve me, how can I help with that? If you listen carefully to Michelle Cracknell from TPAS, anybody that's heard her speak, you know, one of the things that she describes is that they regularly guide customers to go away and seek advice, and they get a bounce back of about 30, 40% of those people come back to them and say, I try to get advice, but actually I can't get anybody to serve me. So it may not be obvious that there is a lack of demand at the moment, but actually there is a pent-up demand that is being unserved, I would suggest. So I think that kind of gives us some of the hard facts, and I think I'd also suggest that it isn't just about the metrics and the numbers and the value that customers can generate through taking advice. our experience is definitely that there is an emotional transition, emotional transfer, a weight burden that customers are looking to gain from the value of advice. I don't know about you, but I know that probably a number of us in this room probably think about things we should do with our finances on and off over quite a long period of time. And as a human race, we are absolutely awesome at putting it off and finding a way of not doing it. Some of you who know me will know that I kind of, when we get a difficult letter in our house or something to deal with, and I kind of think I might get to that tomorrow, it goes down a little partition at the side of our toaster. And probably about 6 months later, we have a clear out and think it's too late to do that now. I'll throw that away. And I think that's what we see from human behavior, is that actually customers are very good at putting off that. But actually the value of taking away that burden of worry and confusion and complexity is huge, and that is part of the solution that advice provides. And I would suggest that actually that emotional transfer and paying attention to that in the services that we provide is an important part of the basis on which trust will be built with consumers over a long period of time, and therefore commercially and from a value perspective, those organisations that will do well will work very hard on building long-term trusted relationships, and customers are looking for that. Customers are carrying that burden of not knowing quite what to do and either making poor decisions, or worse still, probably thinking, you know what, I'll just shrink and not do anything, and inertia being a very powerful force sticking in the marketplace. So somehow we need to try and, I think, unblock this impasse of not enough supply and a constrained demand, I would suggest, in the marketplace. And I think we know that if we make customers feel more comfortable, more engaged, a bit wiser about the decisions that they're making, that actually, you know, whilst in the short term that might require investment, and perhaps even if I was being bold, I would say that if customers are making poor decisions, somebody's probably winning as a result of that, and it's probably some of the larger organisations in the market and providers that benefit from that. But actually, if we can shift that, I think the societal benefits will be obvious in terms of customers getting more from their hard-earned savings. But actually, that build of long-term trust and confidence in doing that will, I think, generate value into the industry as well. So I think the societal and industry purpose follows. The other element, I guess, is for me as a strategic driver is de-risking distribution. As I say, we offer non-advised, and we're kind of comfortable doing that. My preference would be to get as many customers into an advised solution as possible, and for one key reason, which is that if a customer is paying me for advice, they are transferring the risk of that poor decision or that poor outcome to me. As an industry, I think we probably have a greater responsibility to work with customers across more complex problems and challenges and say, you know what, we know how to help you do this and fit the right product to your needs, and therefore doing that through advice is a lower risk solution than one which allows the customer to do that on a self-serve basis. So lots of reasons there, I think, as to why investment in advice solutions is something which we should all be taking seriously, and why I think it's such a now topic in the industry. And what have we learned at LV? Well, no poo, Sherlock. It's quite difficult. We spent 3 years live. We've moved our numbers from, I think we started in the tens, we've moved to the hundreds, and this year we expect to get into the thousands. The big point is digital advice is here, it is possible. I certainly know that when we were talking about this 3 or 4 years ago, you might get chuckling at the back around whether the very prospect of being able to codify and automate complex advice solutions was ever going to be achievable. But I can say that almost without recognising some of the steps that we've made over the last 3 years, because it's kind of a continuous iteration and a continuous improvement process, we can now see that customers are benefiting from complex advice solutions where the technology is enabling that to happen in the way Andrew described earlier, in a much shorter time period and much less advisor effort involved in it. Obviously, as you would expect, we've had strong attention from our risk and governance colleagues around how we manage the risks around this. And I'm really happy to talk about this, because I'm sure that one of the big pieces of information that constrains confidence to invest in this is the risk and governance. And for us, it's not about the systemic mis-selling risk. I mean, obviously, we talk about that occasionally. It's about the brand reputation that we worry about, which is actually for us, much bigger than occasionally getting a piece of advice wrong for a customer. And I would say that our experience has been that it starts with quite, I think, naive view that you switch this thing on and it starts to pump out lots of stuff, and within 3 seconds, 20 million people have got a bit of advice that might be wrong, and the world collapses. I'm slightly exaggerating. It's possibly 10 million, not 20 million, but you get my point. Our experience has been that actually with a little bit more thought and understanding that the risks are different, they're not the same, and some of them are better and some of them require attention. So let me give you a couple of examples of things that I think that we've discovered are pro-risk. So I don't think there are many human advisors where you could perhaps test 1,000 cases on them before you put them out in front of a customer. Using robo-technology, you can do that, and you can get comfort in the lab that you've started to refine your algorithms and your documents, and you've got those right before you put them in front of the customer. Secondly, there is not one single on-off button for automated advice. Certainly what we have learned is you divide your advice into cohorts, and you get more comfortable with some cohorts more quickly, and you get less comfortable with others, and you adopt your risk-based testing of that advice depending on where your risk appetite is for those cohorts of advice and what you're experiencing in the marketplace. So it is a much more refined solution than a simple, it just churns stuff out. And actually, I think that we have learned that risk and governance is something which is part of the innovation that is required here. And if you can bring your risk and governance teams, and I'm sure there are members of those teams in the room, with a mindset of how do we solve this problem safely and securely, and with respect to the with the regulatory outcomes that which we have to observe, that can make a huge difference. And one of the things I think that we've learned is always to try and go back when we do have robust challenges around it, but we always go back to what is the purpose of what we're trying to do. And I think everybody tends to align around, actually, if we're taking a customer through an advice solution, that probably is a better outcome than allowing them to go through a non-advice solution. We should be trying to make this work. I'm really happy to take questions on that through the day, but I do think that's a really important part of the innovation that we have to make. Refining the user experience. I mean, I think we spend a lot of time talking about the challenges of automating advice, and that is where the emphasis is for sure. Actually, the associated design of the user experience from a technical perspective is incredibly complex. Again, let me give you just a couple of examples of areas where we've spent a lot of time thinking through how we do this. So the first will be that in a digital advice world, you effectively have to kind of understand what are the essential data points you need to gather from the customer to generate the advice. That's the language that the regulator uses around essential data points. It doesn't really matter whether they're hard factors or whether they're soft factors. Somehow you kind of have to identify, we need to get the customer down to a clear response on these points of information in order to generate what we consider to be suitable advice that reflects our house advice view. It sounds easy, but actually, whether it's online or through a telephone journey, managing a conversation to actually narrow the customer's response to something which you're comfortable with and that you haven't led them towards or you haven't fatigued them with, so they just give the easiest answer they can do to get rid of the question, is really quite tricky. So there's a huge amount of room in the UX and the user experience design to help make sure that we get that right. The other element, I think, is just the blend of human and technology in solutions. So we've never done anything which is completely online. We've always believed that there is a role for people involved in giving customers the service that they will have confidence in, and also to make sure that we've got that service right. And we've had a number of iterations around just how do you break that down into bite-sized chunks, because advice is not an Amazon experience. There's no kind of click and collect option for advice, and neither do I think there should be, although I'll come back later to some of the ways I think we can take the frictional effort from customers out of advice. Actually designing that in a way that customers feel engaged, involved, don't get fatigued is really, really important. Now, we've tended to find that the way it works best is that we use a high proportion now of telephone-assisted conversations for the fact find. We tend to focus initially now on just gathering the hard facts, collecting information in a fairly short conversation with the customer. We then have a second conversation with the customer to say, looking at what you've told us, some areas that we'd like to discuss further with you and understand better what your needs and your drivers are. And then a third and possibly a fourth conversation around, we've gone away and looked at this. And that might mean we fired up the automated advice in the background and it's happened quite quickly. But we'd like to present you advice, make sure you understand it, make any adjustments to that. But importantly, get some playback from the customer that they really feel comfortable and they do understand some of the concepts that we're talking to them about in terms of investment risk and their ability to respond to changes in circumstances from a flexibility perspective. And I do think that one of the things that, that comes through for me is around, it is quite tempting to design out the human element as you start to see the efficiencies and the automation come through. Actually, we've started to design back in some of that because that's what customers really value. What the automation does is it gives you the freedom to make very clear choices around where you want to invest that time with the customer. And lastly, I guess, just everything is moving very quickly now. I think as Daniel articulated, I think we're just starting to see that everything we've done today is kind of getting out of date quite quickly. And I'll come on a little bit later to things that I think will happen in the future. I would also add, I think, if I was being very objective about what we've done, we have focused on trying to do what Daniel described, which is the kind of the first phase bit of automating and streamlining what exists today as a service proposition. And I think the reason for that is fairly obvious. Actually, it's pretty hard to change one dimension, which is automating advice. But actually, the user experience for advice, is it the greatest user experience that exists in the world today? Not really. And I think others will be able to talk more eloquently than me about some of the potential that is coming through quite quickly about how we can start to really make radical changes to the user experience. And I think that's where the industry needs to be much more challenged on how we make these services more useful and engaging for our customers. So just a brief look out to the future. Why do I think the adoption of automated advice will accelerate? Well, let me go to the third one first. I guess, again, Andrew touched on this. One of the things that I believe now will happen quickly, because you've started to hear about some of this is being developed, is I actually think that automated advice will be able to turn its guns on risk assurance around the quality of advice within the industry. So if you buy the concept that actually you can feed customer circumstances into some fairly complex technology that can start to say, we think these customers got the sort of outcomes that would be reasonable and expected, but here are some outliers, you can start to do some really interesting and powerful things around saying, well, which of our distributors as a product provider is bringing us customers where perhaps we should be a little bit more concerned about the outcomes that they're being delivered? Or indeed, from an advice perspective, which of our customers are not getting the outcomes that we would deliver? And I think that's a little bit of the challenge to the risk and governance world, which is I tend to hear conversations around the benchmark very quickly becomes the human advisor. I might suggest that the human advisor has flaws in what they can and can't do for customers, and actually some more powerful data-driven tech that pulls out cases and customers that perhaps need to be a bit more challenged is, I think, going to be a little bit more useful to the industry in identifying where the risks really exist. And actually, I think I would flip that into, that should bring more confidence into how you invest in automated advice and why it will deliver consistently more better outcomes. And I think that's true not just of human advice, that technology should be pointed at robo-advice as well. So I think it is just kind of agnostic as to where it is helping take risk out of customer outcomes. I think we will see a point fairly soon where the frictional effort involved in customers getting advice solutions will start to materially reduce, and I'll explain why in a second. That kind of reaches a second point, which is about a philosophical point, as at the point at which customers perhaps don't have to put any greater effort and the cost of advice comes down, I think there becomes a little bit of a challenge over why would you continue to offer non-advice solutions if you could actually provide advice for pretty much the same effort and pretty much the same cost. And I think that's a challenge that we will watch over the next few years evolve. One of the things that we're looking to do this year is integrate our non-advice solution into our advice solution. And one of the things that opens up for us is to start to think about, well, actually, with much of the information we gather on our non-advice experience, we can probably fire up advice in the background. So even the customer might not be asking for it, we can start to look at what the advice would shape for the customer silently in the background, and we can then use that to challenge the customer and say, you know what, we can see that if you took advice, we would probably be talking to you about a very different outcome. Why don't you start to help us look at the other options that might not be, otherwise might not be suitable for you? Similarly, I guess one of the things that we are leveraging the technology for is trying to bring into the market lower cost, more focused advice solutions that meet mass market customer needs. So we're working with a partner that we've been developing over the last couple of years around something particularly around workplace solutions, where we think that we can provide really good high quality advice for customers that want to help with accessing their workplace pensions, and we can bring something to the market where using automation we can start to deliver that for about £500. And importantly, working with the partner, we can start to make sure that actually the configuration of the wrappers and the workplace saving schemes are configured in a way that means that actually customers should find that those solutions are optimized for them when an advisor looks at them as the best solution for them to take an income from their workplace savings plan. Clearly, the workplace is going to be one area which is going to be significant in terms of driving up demand for advice. My last point, I guess, is really around the user experience, and as I say, I'll leave others to talk about it. And this is something we mocked up a year, 18 months ago about one of the ways that we think technology will emerge to change the way customers interact with advice. So for me, the big challenge with advice is a huge push effort from the customer. We all know with things like GDPR, open banking regulations, AI, speech recognition, that the ability to pull things together and present them as intelligent, intuitive solutions for customers is within reach. I don't know what the timescales for that are, but these things are starting to happen, and we're starting to see organisations like Revolut, for example, start to bring services in that are outside their original core domain. I think I just flip it slightly and say, I think we always have to kind of go back to what is it the customers are trying to achieve, and what they're not trying to achieve is advice. And one of the reasons why I think it's quite hard to generate demand for advice is that customers don't get up in the morning and feel that's the solution to the problem. They're wrestling with the problem. And I think actually if you can start to imagine a world where you can pull together for a customer and declutter the complicated and the separate ways that they have to manage their finances, and whether that's guidance and help and advice combined, but you can start to bring it together in a single solution that feels like it knows you as an individual, is giving you prompts and tips and goals and working with you to get a little bit more out of your hard-earned savings and take away some of the things that you worry about. I think that will become a very potent and powerful solution for customers. And that's not all about advice. It is about help and guidance. It's a little bit about perhaps thinking about a Fitbit for wealth and health, which puts you on a program to get you to where you want to get to in maybe a 1-year horizon rather than a 20-year horizon. But the importance about regulated advice, I guess, is that if anywhere within that proposition you want to do the thing that the customer most wants you to do when it gets hard, which is tell me which products I should think about investing or buying and what actions I should take, the threshold standard for that is what we call regulated advice. So if you want to provide solutions that are really helpful and really transfer that responsibility from the individual to the industry, because we do know how to do it, then somewhere within there you have to have advice powering up your proposition. So it may not play out exactly like this, but I am pretty convinced that in the next few years we will start to see consumers making greater use of applications supported by humans that pull this together for them and make it just much more easy for them to invest time in the things that they're probably much more motivated to do than financial services. And I think in terms of trust busters or disruption, and that's the first time I think we've used that word today, my wonder is whether in a few years' time the real disruption will be that from a consumer perspective there will be a mass audience out there that will say, you know what, the thing that I most value is that thing that helps me every day reduce my debt, save a little bit more, enjoy my life a little bit better, feel a bit more confident about what I'm doing. I don't think they'll particularly care about whether it's an LV product or a just retirement product or a standard life product. I think they will come to learn and value and trust and build long-term confidence in that solution that is helping me manage that much more efficiently and effectively. That, I think, potentially is where automated advice will be at the heart of something which fundamentally changes the way customers look to our market. And rather than facing product decisions, they kind of just access it through help solutions that work effectively for them. And I think I'm an optimist, so my belief is that if anybody is worried about disruption, I really don't think there is any need to be, because actually this is about meeting an unserved need predominantly. This is about trying to access people that would just be better off, do better for them, do better for the industry, and do better in the long term for UK PLC through helping customers with that. And one of the things that really, really motivates me, I have to say, and the team is sometimes within the muck and the bullets of what we're trying to do on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, we just get little glimpses of that through customer stories where customers have engaged with advice that perhaps came in kicking and screaming, didn't think advice was for them, maybe they had a safeguarded benefit, or one of our non-advisors has persuaded them they really ought to get advice. And at the end of it, you get the story around, I was going to do that, I'm so glad I didn't, because there would have been a tax bill, I would have ended up in a poor value product, I would have done what my friends told me to do, and it was the wrong solution for me. I think I'm always kind of reminded that somewhere in this is the little person, the people like us as customers, and that's what we're trying to get to, is help give them a better deal, help them feel better off, and help them just feel more confident about what they're doing with their lives. Thank you very much.